Every living thing that has ever existed has a day of the year when they came into existence, better known as a birthday. So it doesn't matter if you consider these kinds of criminals as monsters, they still have a day of the year that is special to them too. Now, I've spent many years researching SKs and during that time have compiled all the data needed to provide you with this video where you can now find out which one of these guys you might have to share that one day that is supposed to be all about you. So make sure to leave who your serial killer birthday twin is in the comments below, alongside just how much you might now hate me, given that you'll never be able to unlearn this information. And with that, please like and subscribe. And just one final thing. Happy birthday! What am I doing? William Bonin is one of 3 well-known serial killers that all share this same nickname. Most of his 20+ victims found discarded alongside freeways. George Joseph Smith was an Englishman who had no less than 8 wives, up to 6 at any one time. He took the lives of at least 3 women who he'd sweet-talked into signing wills with him as beneficiary. The New York-born Baldy was released due to an error in transferring him when undergoing mental health treatment, allowing him to continue his series of killings. One of the most prolific SKs of all time, Garavito was convicted of 142 homicides, but confessed to well over 200. A man who loved feet, Brudos cut them off some of his victims to keep and pose in various shoes for later self-satisfaction. Schumann was a decorated German soldier who, after the end of World War I, continued killing, but no longer in service of his country anymore, rather to fill his own pockets. Darrell Rich was brazen with his attacks, even bragging to friends how easy they were to carry out. A man with zero remorse, his series luckily only lasted a few months. Strangely, Leap Year Day holds the birthdays of 2 notorious SKs born 4 years apart. Ramirez, who better became known as the Night Stalker, holds a level of infamy to this day, and Warnos, the most well-known female serial killer in modern American history. Otis Toole was a serial killer and serial confessor, admitting to hundreds of murders, almost all confessions carrying no weight at all, mostly just regurgitating what he'd read in the newspaper about suspicious deaths. John Wayne Gacy was a respected businessman, trusted supporter of the Democrat Party, and of course enthusiastic children's entertainer as Pogo the Clown. Over 30 young boys' bodies were found buried under his house. Kraft kept a cryptic scorecard of his kills, with most of his young adult male victims found dumped beside freeways. He also earned the shared moniker of Freeway Killer. Fair warning, some descriptions of his crimes are particularly disturbing. If Hill didn't continue committing other crimes, he may have gotten away with the multiple murders he carried out in his youth entirely. But after his DNA was taken while serving time for other things, he would ultimately face justice for them. Irvin's half-dozen murders and subsequent trial in the 50s was the first time the Supreme Court got involved when it deemed the jury was biased due to the pre-trial publicity surrounding the serial killer. Eventually though, he would spend the remainder of his days behind bars. A serial swindler, the short Frenchman Landru supposedly seduced hundreds of women, all of which in the pursuit of their money. At least 11 of these women were never seen again, with the term Bluebeard being the male version of a black widow. Jian Chili was given her nickname for a very good reason. She literally did make soap out of her victims' bodies. The reason was that she believed her son required protection during the Second World War, and so she made human sacrifices to provide that for him. David Carpenter made hiking in California very risky for women during the 2 years he was active. Even before his series began, he was considered a dangerous man, once being a suspect in the Zodiac murders. The vastness and nature of H.H. Holmes' crimes may well have been exaggerated over and over in the various iterations of his life story that have been told during the last 100+ years. But who doesn't want to learn about a murder castle? Albert Fish's story contains a darkness and evil that isn't as well told as many other serial killers you may know about. With a penchant for self-harm in some very strange ways, every part of his life and crimes will leave you horrified. The minor omissions or errors in the Netflix drama about one of the most notorious and well-known serial killers in American history don't take away from it showing a fairly well-rounded take on the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. So if somehow you don't know who this is, I'd definitely recommend watching that first. If June 7th happens to be your birthday, you may have thought you lucked out and got a somewhat unknown, less bad serial killer. Unfortunately for you, Samuel Little holds the record for the most confirmed victims of any serial killer in United States history at 60. Lil Petey murdered 71 people in Brazil, and on release, yes, he was released, he went on to become a YouTuber. Because of course he did. This 19th century French serial killer's face, which was reconstructed from Dumoulard's own skin, is available to see in the flesh, unintended, all these years later in a museum. Charles Schmidt was a pathological liar who led a small band of local teens, some of which would become his victims. He stuffed his cowboy boots to make himself taller, wore prosthetics on his face and slicked back his hair to emulate Elvis. The Black Widow Becca poisoned many of her lovers and would offer her secret stash of foxgloves to a friend who had been moaning about wanting rid of her husband. However, when that friend cooled off, she would turn in Becca to the cops. Hayes' crimes didn't quite play out like that one Breaking Bad episode, even though his nickname might suggest it. You should just replace the word bath with barrel. Resendez would hop on and off railway cars, find a house close to where the train had stopped, murder the occupant, eat their food, steal whatever he could sell, and hop right back on a train and be off again. Durousseau's series may have started while stationed in Germany with the US Army, but this has never been confirmed. It was only on his return to his home country that we know for sure that he began taking the lives of young women, including 2 who were pregnant. Alcala is best known for having participated in a televised dating show whilst mid-series. Comments from the other contestants would later describe him as strange and creepy. Little did they know what kind of monster had actually stood just meters in front of them. Lonnie Franklin was nicknamed due to the 14-year quiet period in his crimes, almost like the serial killer part of him was sleeping. If he genuinely wasn't murdering during this time period, or has simply never been connected to any that had occurred, is up for debate. Maria Swanenberg was a 19th century serial poisoner who took 27 lives in the Netherlands. Mostly it was her own family members who fell to her greed. She sought only their inheritance. Louise Peet was another female serial killer whose primary weapon was not poisons this time, yet her victims were still husbands and lovers killed for her own financial gain. Another freeway killer, Kearney struggled with his sexuality from an early age, and when his crimes were eventually publicised, it only added fuel to the homophobic narrative that was rampant at the time. One half of the pair, known as the Hillside Stranglers, Buono and his cousin pretended to be LA cops to lure unsuspecting young girls into their car. They took at least 10 lives in just 4 months during the 70s. Walls is one of America's youngest serial killers ever. Being arrested at just 19 years old, he had already murdered 5 people and at just 23 would be sentenced to death in Florida. Bobby Joe Long had 2 notable head injuries as a child and shared a bed with his mother until 13. As an adult, he suffered a 3rd head injury in a motorbike accident whilst in the US Army, and he then married his longtime sweetheart who, similar to his mother, was also domineering. None of these things can excuse the 12 brutal murders he committed in the mid-80s though. One of Sweden's very short list of serial killers, his translated nickname may mean girl killer, but Lovegren's first 2 victims were 26 and 62 years old. It was the final 2 that were both under the age of 7. D'Angelo was a former police officer whose plethora of crimes only came to light decades later, when DNA testing finally caught up to him. He'd earned several nicknames, including the original Night Stalker and Golden State Killer being the 2 most well known. Hells Bell might have been one of the most prolific female serial killers ever, and to add to the mystery surrounding her, she may well have faked her own death and gotten away with a series of killings that could number up to 40 victims. Yes, Manson is not in technical terms a serial killer, but his name is too notable to leave out of this video. The leader of a cult in California in the 60s known as the Manson family, he and his followers would be convicted of 9 murders, including the one of famous actress Sharon Tate. Ted Bundy is possibly the most infamous serial killer who has ever lived, and so if your birthday also lands on November 24th, then at least on the bright side, you can use that info to be the most fun and interesting person at every party you go to from now on. Or not. Gomez murdered homeless men around California in the early 50s, robbing them of everything they had, even if sometimes that amounted to just a single dollar. One half of the speed freak killers, Herzog and his murderous partner in crime, had grown up together as kids, with the same interests in fishing, hunting, methamphetamine, abusing women, and murder. You know, the normal things you might get up to with your best mate. 6'9" Ed Kemper murdered his grandparents as a teenager, and would move on to taking the lives of female students. But his most notorious murder was that of his own mother, and the insane things he did with her severed head. New Year's Eve babies don't get away scot-free, I'm afraid. The DC sniper served in the US Army for 16 years, but after an honourable discharge, it was in 2002, he began taking aim at his fellow patriots. Lying down in the back of his car, the barrel of his rifle poking out from a hole he drilled in the trunk. The random shootings took the lives of 17 people over the course of 6 months. If you're still here at the end of the video, thanks for watching through the whole thing and not just skipping to your own birthday. Your prize is a graph I created showing how many serial killers have their birthdays in each month. I know, you're very welcome. And with that, I was Rob, and I'm going back to bed.